Architecture is definitely impactful. Even if it's just for like one family, it could be a valuable way of giving back. But the actual architect act, you could say, a process is really about customization and really creating a value with a particular piece of architecture.
What is architecture, and how is it relevant beyond the desks of one industry of designers? Those are some of the questions to be addressed today by architect Brandon Aaron Gibbs, director of Studio Motionform, founder of the course platform Iamthestudio, and host of the Architecture Beyond podcast.
Hello and welcome to Architecture Beyond. I'm your host, Brandon Aaron Gibbs, founder of the course platform Iamthestudio and director of Studio Motionform. Architecture Beyond is an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their design and creativity gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This is our first series of episodes, so I hope you enjoy our guests and stories. Be sure to listen to the end for your opportunity of connecting with Architecture Beyond. Hello, welcome to the Architecture Beyond podcast. Today I'm just going over 10 questions that are going to really be valuable for people thinking about architecture. Briefly, I did want to give an introduction to myself. I'm Brandon Aaron Gibbs, the podcast host for Architecture Beyond. I have a background in architecture. I'm a licensed architect. I studied in New York and London at Pratt Institute and Architecture Association. I grew up in the southern region of the U.S., Memphis, Tennessee, where there's towers I was around all the time. I love to create and make things. I love also computers. That's how I got really tiered toward the studying of Zaha Hadid, studying under a partner. And I've been involved in parametric design. I create courses with Iamthestudio. And with Motionform, I focus on innovation and innovative properties of architecture. This podcast has been an idea for people talking about the world after you get into architecture. But a lot of people are interested in what do you do to start, or where do you go? So that's why I've focused on these questions that are really insightful. And as you go through this show, you'll be hearing some ideas for getting a good footing based on your interest, because architecture, just like some people might say with medicine, you have particular areas that you're drawn to. For instance, you might be drawn to more innovation or more classical styles, or maybe you're drawn to 3D printing or maybe sculptural. Obviously, some people are interested very much in design. Some people are interested in the business side. So the purpose of knowing that first footing is really critical. So those are going to be the questions that we go over today. So I hope you sit back and enjoy. If you have any more questions you'd like to ask, stay tuned to the end of the show, and also sort of get your contact information for connecting with Architecture Beyond. One of the lead questions that we're going to start with is, how do you get involved in architecture? This is more valuable both for people who are around the profession, maybe even people who are like, hey, look, I like the things architects are doing. People in college who say, hey, look, I'm an arts major, I want to get more involved in architecture. Then there could be people who are in high school who are saying, okay, what do I do before I start? And I would start by telling you the career path of an architecture program, an architecture candidate. Pretty much you're going to be going to school to learn the technicals as well as the art of architecture. That's a 5-year program. There's a lot of great programs. Each program has their specific things, so it's good to really research. I went to Pratt Institute. I went to this school that's very much about design. Some schools go into more technical. Some schools go more into regional. Just hey, this is what architecture is, and some goes into more innovation. So it's always good to do your research. Obviously, there's some schools that have more resources or less resources. I think just research what's available. You can always start at one school and then move on to a more advanced school for things that you're interested in. I think I saw that a lot as well. So there's not really a limitation by starting at maybe a local university. Then as you get in, I think the things that are going to be looked at in the portfolio are going to be, there's typically a portfolio review where you give a sample of your work, which you can really do either high school architecture classes, or you can have art classes where you're learning drawing and learning how to use your hand-eye coordination, maybe even learning some of the CAD software or different programs like Rhino or these 3D visualization programs. And those are some great skills. There's a lot of stuff that's really free for students. So you could be building something of a portfolio that's going to be looked at as well as your other grades. So of course, doing well in math and science is going to be useful for your application process. So what are the skills that are needed to become an architect? This is a good question because there's a lot of different skills that people have in the creative world or technical world. For instance, Christopher Wren came into architecture from being an architect. He's an architect in Great Britain, and he was tasked with designing churches across London that were burned during the London Bridge fire. And so the idea is there's valuable skills, and here's just a few. And if you're starting out in architecture, or you're just figuring out if you would want to go in architecture, here are some skills that are really valuable to have. The first one definitely is mathematics. Understanding different geometry is very much intertwined. How do these work together? It's actually a peer to the engineering industry, because the idea is you have to do calculations for how the building works, but also that connection with geometry, things like points and lines, is going to be really valuable because you're understanding how things are working. Also, in terms of systems, for instance, when we're building like a large building, you have to calculate, a lot of different information like measurements, sizes, and so math understanding is very, very valuable. Another great understanding skill that you would need is the skill of drawing. I draw all the time. I didn't really have so much of an art background when I started, but understanding and being interested, getting my sketchbook, learning how to sketch better was really valuable for me. I took a foundation in art, and I think that skill was really useful. There's a lot of online courses. However, I think there's a lot of great programs as well, like maybe community colleges or other programs, like even major universities have like programs that you can do as continuing education to learn some of those skills. So even if you're starting on architecture, some skills to develop are your visualization. A lot of people have the good question from starting out: how do I choose architecture school? This is both for undergraduate and graduate, because you're trying to figure out where is the first step. And I think the best indicator of a school that you like is definitely knowing people who went there. And so if you have like an idea of a school, maybe Harvard, GSD, or Rice University, or even like a local college, like for me, it was like University of Memphis, the thing is to meet people who are in those schools. Every school has, of course, its maybe leadership alumni. However, they also have their key programs and valuable offerings. And I think it's good to learn about those. Of course, some guides can tell you about what those things are, but also it's good to just start your sort of inquiry process. It's definitely not something that you would want to limit to a few days, or a few weeks. I would say the process for learning about a school, both undergraduate and graduate, should be from 6 months to 1 year. If you were thinking about it in the time before, I think that's also quite valuable, because you'll have the ability to say, if you're in high school starting out, this is the place I'm really heading. And I think some focus periods, maybe during the summer, is where you can probably get like a summer program. Like I had a summer program for Pratt Institute where I learned a lot about it. I did some skills for art and architecture, learning about the program, and it was really good foundation for when I applied and got in. And I think the same thing is going to be for even a graduate program, or if you're in later career where you might be interested in a fellowship or a doctorate, because you want to know what the school is going to offer you, where you're going to be able to get your foot in terms of doing some valuable work, as well as where you're going to go afterwards. Question number 4 is, what are some entry-level jobs within architecture? So I think these are jobs that are both for people who just have a little bit of an interest in architecture, as well as undergraduates, I feel, or those who are starting out. The first one for sure is draftsperson. Draftsperson is some skill based on learning how to draft, which is how we had done it before, with maybe your hand drawing architectural details, or be different plans in 2D and possibly 3D. However, nowadays it's mostly with the computer. So that's going to be one of the key things is definitely draftsperson. The skill is just really needing to communicate, learn out what do you need to draw, and being able to technically do it well. Of course, you're going to be learning valuable programs, and I think hand drawing is something that you should learn, as well as the 2D and 3D with computers. Even learning 3D in general is going to help. There's a lot of firms that definitely need draftspeople, whether you're educated in college or just have that technical skill. It's of course valuable to get like some certification in those skills as well. So the next level of entry-level positions is actually visualizer. It's a little more customized in skill set. That's the ability to sort of do visualizations, whether it's with computer or by hand, to visualize architecture. So it could be an interior, it could be exterior. It definitely will take an ability sometimes with color and materials, but being able to make something that's, which is a regular model, be more contextual, more visualized, something beautiful that will attract clients. And so visualization is definitely entry level because the idea is you're building some skills. It's something that someone might not need an architectural background in, but it's definitely a valuable part of our industry. And so visualizer is another set. I think to get into that job, you're definitely going to know some of the software, some of the techniques for making beautiful drawings. Definitely, if you are looking for architectural renders, there's a lot of great ones on Pinterest. You can also look for visualizing architecture, visualizing information for some other examples of architectural renders that are really iconic to say, hey, look, this is the type of work that I want to do. And it definitely will help you get a foot in the industry. Another entry-level job is the intern architect. Intern architect is typically reserved for people who have taken their a few years of school of architecture. However, that's definitely still entry-level. You're able to get in your foot in with not too much experience. You have to be asking questions, growing. Typically, if someone's in college, you're going to get a little more on track to growing more junior in that industry, in that firm. You could definitely will see that it's something that you probably want to be getting the most experience with. So it's not something you want to, just go with a very limited experience. You want to be part of a firm where you can get some experience, and maybe it will be several firms where you'll intern to get a wealth of skills. Here's question number 5. How do you get involved with architecture as a hobby? So maybe you're interested in architecture, but you want to grow that passion. So this could be for someone who's just an enthusiast, someone who says, hey, I'm an artist, I like architecture, or I just want to sort of be like a collector. Well, one of the first ways is definitely looking for landmarks. Pretty much preservation is very common nowadays to preserve some major architecture from the past, or even some newer versions of architecture, and just sort of explore that. I know the AIA tour, I've been a docent, this is a tour guide for different properties within the city. I think that's a valuable way to also learn about architecture. Definitely, I think a lot of architecture schools will have a series where they invite architects to talk, where you can learn about what's going on. This could be an interest, of course, if a homeowner or someone who is wanting to know a little bit more about what goes into architecture, and see maybe what are opportunities to improve maybe a design they're looking for, or if you're interested in buying a house, you will get some information. There are also, of course, museums that have notable examples that you can look about learn about architecture. I, for instance, went to Frank Gehry's exhibit at the Guggenheim, New York, and I felt that was really beautiful because you can see all his models from various projects. And so that's very valuable for me. I think anyone who's really interested in the architecture side, that was a great way to get exposure. I think also it is good maybe just sometimes to say, if you like a firm in town, just to ask questions. Hey, could I have a tour of your project? Some architects have in-house events where they talk about different things for architecture and around it. And it's just a really, really valuable culture.
You are listening to Architecture Beyond, an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking the gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This episode is featuring 20 popular questions about architecture that host Brandon Gibbs is breaking down to elaborate on the foundations of architecture, what it is and where it comes from. This podcast is produced by Iamthestudio, a premium resource for training architecture and design professionals in the top industry software. If you need help with learning design software and techniques to a professional level, please follow the link on our page.
Question number 6, what are some common misconceptions about architecture? Architecture is really diverse, as well as a very much feeling oriented profession. That means that that architecture, hey, this is a building, this is architecture. However, there's some ways to look at those misconceptions. The first one is that every building is not exactly an architectural work. That means that the art and science that goes and creates maybe styles and interest in architecture are not always applied. Like a builder could just put a shed together. The architectural process that went into making maybe the first log cabins might not be as involved in maybe someone just duplicating it. That's one of the little differences that we have in the architecture industry, where we say that this is not really architecture, if it's just sort of pulling, like houses. For instance, a lot of developers will make, a row of houses, and you say, oh, well, those not architect. Well, really, again, like the architect does produce maybe plans and sort of prototypes for architecture, but the actual architecture act, you could say, a process is really about customization and really creating a value with a particular piece of architecture. So if you don't, or you've never sort of seen maybe like a major work, you've probably definitely seen in your town where you say, hey, look, this is more well crafted than the other one. Another example is sort of saying, well, what really defines architecture? Maybe some people are thinking it's just the aesthetic. That's not true, because the idea is it's very functional. It's very much architecture being an applied art. That means we're responding to environment, to material. We have pretty much even industries set up around specifying the way that materials connect, their warranties, how they operate, as space and all this element before just using it. For instance, like a found sculptor can put like two materials together, but an architect, we really have to make sure materials can fit together. And so that level of complexity is where our understanding goes way beyond aesthetic. Aesthetic is beautiful, it's valuable. However, the level of complexity for a building to be operating requires a lot more than aesthetic. Another misconception is that architect is some high thing for maybe people who have this great value of money. That's also not true. Frank Lloyd Wright, notable American architect, was actually known for reaching down to customers maybe who couldn't afford maybe higher architectural work, and he even got to like this super tight budget for a very valuable home, because it's really about the ideas that are putting in as well as material choices. You can always substitute like a higher end material for a lower end material, and you can always use simple and repeatable details to provide an architectural, well thought out building for a lower price. Question number 7 is, how can I network with industry professionals? I always, again, point people toward organizations like the AIA, American Institute of Architects. However, there's organizations like the USGBC, which is the Green Building Council, as well as organizations like National Organization of Minority Architects. In addition to local museums, there are different architecture groups. There's some groups on sustainability, like the COTE, Council on the Environment. There are different organizations that help people to get involved in various parts of architecture. It's not always about maybe the local, maybe it could be about a culture, maybe it could be celebrating, Spanish heritage. I think there's a lot of organizations nowadays that help you build community around architecture, and this is also opportunities for connecting with a firm if you're networking to look for work opportunities, if you want to learn about a particular style. These are ways to meet people. Typically, AIA chapters meet monthly, so that follows with other organizations. But also, there are some major events where you can get involved. I've been to several AIA national events, which are ways to connect and meet people. But I've been also part of other types of organizations. And again, this is around architects. This is where architects are going. So maybe if you're looking for work, maybe bring a portfolio. If you're looking for maybe a network, or maybe if you're looking for your own architect, you would have the opportunity to sort of ask questions and get to know people. Question number 8 is, what are some valuable trends in architecture? Architectural trends nowadays are easier to find. Whereas communities before, maybe you were looking and you had to go to a particular place to learn about, for instance, maybe Scottish architecture with, Rene McIntosh, or maybe you had to find Frank Lloyd Wright to find a little more about modernism. Now, of course, it's the internet, but there's also events that are really broadcasting that they're going on. So here are some trends that you can actually find very easily nowadays in architecture. The first one I think is very valuable is the sustainable trend. That means that its connection with green design, or architecture that doesn't take away as much as it provides in terms of energy, fuels, and also sustainable elements, and even cultures. For instance, architecture should be providing value to culture, shouldn't just be for the rich, etc. That's a trend that involves how we use materials, how do we create spaces, how we also will put thought so that architecture materials are locally sourced, labor is locally sourced, and that's something that will go a long way for a building to be valuable. There's also a new trend with sustainability for net zero buildings. There's also included different awards for accrediting buildings for achieving those goals, and there are also grants. So look out for that in terms of some of the trends, because that type of valuable architecture that will benefit the environment and sort of go away from some of the recent trends of industrialization, where architects are providing just as much pollution as other industries. And so by going the other direction, focusing on sustainability, we're actually helping the environment a lot more so. Another trend is parametric architecture. Essentially looking at our ability with digital design, different materials that are pretty much needing to be calculated, and working with computational systems, computer programs, including now AI, we can be generating architecture on a vaster scale with geometries, with working with how architecture can be providing particular values, how it can be responding to different systems, for instance, flows, or the environment, for instance, having architectural panels that relate to the sun at different times of the day, or even just having maybe more of a kinetic architecture that responds like a facade that moves. Those are different types of things that are related to parametric architecture. It's pretty much our ability to gather and use algorithms to solve larger problems in architecture and also larger formal challenges. I think it's something that's valuable because it also can plug into sustainability really well. Zaha Hadid is one of the major practitioners, as well as Jarka Ingels, and these architects both have firms that operate around the world, and you'll see their designs. So question number 9 is really valuable to me. The question is, how do I impact my local community with architecture? Architecture is definitely impactful. Even if it's just for like one family, it could be a valuable way of giving back. I serve with Habitat for Humanity, and I built homes for low-income families who maybe couldn't afford their own, and I felt that was incredibly valuable. Just to be able to give someone a home for their family and their community, it was really a valuable thing to do. So that's definitely one way. You also have the ability to participate in local review boards, where you could look at the type of architecture that's being developed, and you could, of course, give your feedback. Sometimes, of course, the architecture community might need valuable direction for what can preserve a community well. And so people who've put in the time to focus on either codes or styles that are valuable can inform the architecture that's been in that arena. However, I think there's also some advocacy boards where you can actually be also advocating for architects in the world, where maybe contractors or engineers, pretty much a community might be a little disconnected from architecture. Maybe preserving the architectural function is a valuable thing that advocates can do. That's because obviously some industries, some places, maybe the architect's influence is lowered. However, architecture is really valuable to preserving communities. It's valuable for urban design. So there's AIA organizations that are part of the advocates for architecture and architects, but it's also just really supporting the architectural process. It's making so it's going to help a community in the long term, because obviously if you think about, like, sometimes maybe there's an element of, hey, let's just build as fast as possible. However, that could be a detriment to a community. So by being part and supporting advocate organizations, we can have better communities as well. And some other ways of increasing your impact is definitely finding out what's going on with different firms who maybe want to give back, maybe educate. I think the NOMA initiative for educating students is something I really like, where they're going into schools and teaching people about architecture, hey, how you can be involved. It's not just architects coming in and doing our work, but it's actually saying, hey, look, you can be an architect and you can be part, your voice is important for this architectural process. So the last question of this question set is, what are some examples of architecture that has successfully impacted a community? And as well as architecture, that means both architects, engineers, the community, the people who are building, as well as the owners and stakeholders. I think one notable example for sure for me is understanding about the Bilbao in Guggenheim Museum, pretty much. The Guggenheim in Bilbao is an architecture product by architect Frank Gehry, who was also collaborating with the community as well as the museum to create something that would bring life to the community. So when I visited it, I both visited across the street looking at the more classical vernacular architecture as well as Guggenheim. And I think it works really well together. It brings interest, it brings museum, that community can thrive because they have a local architectural element. It's definitely iconic, and so it stands out, but at the same time, it's something that people are invited into. It's not just, closed off. Some other examples of this are different architectural implements like, in terms of museums, even the Guggenheim, that is also in New York by Frank Lloyd Wright. So that's another sort of example of a building that sort of participates. However, if you go back to some of the earlier designs by architects like Zaha Hadid, the Vitra Fire Station is an example where she's putting her ideas and her interest. Yeah, at the same time, it's like be a cultural icon that you would go into. I feel there's some other architecture that's just really valuable, maybe just for a community. It's not always about just being an icon. Maybe it's something that is just providing like a community house. For instance, with Auburn University, their rural studio, they create a lot of architecture for the local environment, for places they need, like in terms of libraries and schools and places for the young people to go. And I think they've actually created several incredible facilities with architecture. And it's not always about being iconic and using modern materials. Sometimes it's just a valuable place made sensibly for a community. I think in New York, some examples of maybe also some more pretty much local architecture that's valuable is the Lincoln Center. However, I know that that's definitely a larger sort of space as entertainment. However, it's valuable and people really get a lot out of it. So when architects will create something for a community, it's really valuable. I know for sure by being a residential designer, I've also seen very valuable products created just for a family, but it's still something that's valuable for, the family to invite their other relatives over, and it's a hub of their family activity and life and how they'll start to contribute. And a lot of times with residential architecture that's really made in a more iconic way, it actually becomes a community feature as well. And those are 10 questions about really getting involved with architecture, ways that people who are starting can connect, and ways that people in the industry can go further. Those questions were valuable to think about, and I think the questions that you might have about architecture, about getting involved, are going to be valuable as well. So again, follow this episode to the end for your ways of getting involved. Thanks a lot for the question and contribution. There's a lot of excellent guests that I have lined up and that I've had that are going to provide their insight into the world of architecture. I know that these conversations are things that help me. I've always taught both with architects and those beyond the industry, and I think Architecture Beyond is capturing value in that way. So thanks a lot for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode.
It was excellent hearing about the breakdown of the first set of the 20 popular questions about architecture from host and Iamthestudio founder Brandon Aaron Gibbs. As an architect and educator, his perspective sheds light on what architecture is and how architecture affects the world around us. If you are interested in learning more about the newest design software and techniques, visit our sponsor Iamthestudio at iamthestudio.com and sign up with our newsletter This Week in Design.
In the next episode, we'll take a diversion to venture into the intersection of real estate and architecture with trained architect and founder of the Aceves Group, Santiago Aceves. Be sure to check it out.
Architecture Beyond is an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This is our first series of episodes, and we're interested in your feedback. Are there some topics you would like to hear, or are you interested in being a guest? Go to iamthestudio.com and click on Arch Beyond in the menu for more information.